Friends, please stand for the singing of our first hymn, which is number 378 in the red hymnal, verses 1, 2, and 6. Please be seated. Good friends all, we are privilege to gather together to celebrate the life and service of Dr. Aram V. Chobanian, our 9th president at Boston University. And we are gathered with family, with extended family, and with full family presence, and also with the family, if I may, of Boston University, including its Board of Trustees and including its presidential leadership, including its various offices, deans, faculty, staff, and administration. This is a high and holy and significant moment, and for the chance to be here together, we are truly and fully, deeply grateful. We are here to grieve, remember, accept, and affirm. So we continue to grieve the loss of a loved one. Grief moves like the ebb and flow of the tide. It comes and it goes, and part of our being here today is to continue that work together of grieving. We are here to remember, and each one of us will carry a particular and precious memory, or 2 or 3 or more. For Jan and me, it's late April of 2005 when, though we were headed in another direction in more than one sense, we had a phone call from Boston University that just could not be avoided. So over we came, and on a Friday morning at 10 o'clock, having to make decisions in a few hours that were lifespan changing and long, I realized in retrospect that what I most needed speaking to the president, Aram Chobanian, was a sense of trust, a sense of trust. Can I trust this place? Can I trust this institution? Can I trust its representative in this president? And you will not be surprised that within 20 minutes, I had in full the positive response to that. And the rest is history. Now, some will say maybe Dr. Chobanian made a mistake in hiring Dean Hill, but it's a long time ago, and we'll let that go for now. We're here to remember. That also is a labor. We're here to accept the separation that comes with physical death, and yet allows us a fuller and a spiritual connection, which we will kindle and rekindle today. We are accepting the separation that comes with physical death, trusting in God's presence and guidance and the promise of eternal life. And speaking of which, we are here to affirm, each one differently. We are here to affirm what for each one of us matters, counts, lasts, holds true. For some, that will be a philosophical view or family history and tradition. For some, it will be a particular religious tradition. But for all, it is that sense of meaning, belonging, and empowerment that carries us forward, and which Aram Chobanian so fully exemplified. From this point forward, dear ones, we will proceed in the service without further introduction or interruption, and we will guide ourselves by the program so carefully prepared for us as President Freeman comes to begin, and we to enjoy these moments together.
Good afternoon. We gather this afternoon to celebrate the life and devoted service of Aram Chobanian, 9th president of Boston University and long-serving dean of what is now so magnificently known as the Chobanian and Avedisian School of Medicine. In the presence of his family, we, the Boston University community, say thank you. And we offer reflections on Aram's many contributions as a researcher, a physician, an administrator, an academic leader, and yes, a serious musician, as we heard in the prelude this afternoon. For my part, having served in an interim capacity this academic year, Aram's leadership during time of great turmoil here during his administration has served as a compelling exemplar. After I agreed to serve as interim president, I went to the history books and was inspired by how Aram calmed and unified the BU campus, the community, in a manner similar to the deliberate way and calm bedside manner we develop with our medical students. Aram's presidential imprint on our university endures to this very day. As we enroll succeeding generations of medical students, we outfit them with white coats embroidered with the Chobanian name. This is much more than a tribute. It's a visible reminder that there is much to learn from the life, the example set by Aram Chobanian, physician, family man, teacher, and academic leader. We are eternally grateful to him.
Good afternoon. I'm Tom Moore. I'm an endocrinologist, a physician, worked with Aram at the medical school. He actually hired me in 2001. I worked with him until 2003 when he was drafted to the Charles River campus as president. So I really only worked for him for a little over 2 years, but we were friends before that, and we remained close friends since. The family has asked me to do a summary of his scientific career, and I'm happy to do that, although 275 publications and I have 5 minutes to do it. I couldn't show them as quick slides that fast, but I will be more than happy to do that. And I seriously do appreciate the honor of having this opportunity. Aram's scientific career stretched 60 years. His first publication was in 1957, and his last publication was in 2017. His curriculum vitae is, of course, voluminous, and I didn't exactly know how to boil that down for this presentation, so I turned to someone that everybody turned to over the years, and that is Diana Lehman, who was Aram's longtime executive assistant. But even with Diana's help, we couldn't come up with a very good way to do this. I thought, well, maybe I'll just limit it to the things that Aram was proud of. That didn't work either because Aram never talked in a prideful way about his work. Very few things brought out pride in Aram, and the main thing was his family. He was so proud of Karen and Lisa and Aram and Mark and Vanessa, and of course, Jasmine, the love affair of his life. He would be proud of that, but to pick what he was proud of in his scientific, that didn't work. So what I've decided to do is I'm going to give sort of a high-level overview of the big areas that he worked in, and then pick just one of his publications that I think is particularly informative about the way Aram went about his work, his expertise, and his leadership ability. So to start with, at a high level, I already mentioned he has 275 publications over a period of 60 years. His first publication as a medical student was in the New England Journal of Medicine, and his last publication was in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Those are both highly prestigious journals, so he had both a good start and a good finish and a lot of good material in between. He brought in over $1 million a year in research grants for over 25 years in succession. That shows both a successful career and amazing continuity. Early in his career, he worked on blood pressure. And in those days, we were just learning that treating blood pressure had certain benefits, although not all of them were known. And new types of medications were coming out all the time, and Aram's early career was in that area. He then turned, in addition to blood pressure, he turned to atherosclerosis and cholesterol, another emerging area, and spent a good part of the mid-portion of his career. And by the time he was in the late 80s, maybe early 90s, he was so well established in the field of hypertension that he took on the role of sort of the senior statesman. And an awful lot of what he did was publish and speak about what we were learning about high blood pressure, because although we knew that it killed people, we didn't really have very good ways of getting doctors in the office to identify it and treat it to lower it to appropriate levels. And Aram spent a good deal of the last probably 25 years of his career working on that. In addition to that, he had countless awards, major awards from almost every cardiology and hypertension organization. He had a Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Heart Association for his work in hypertension, and that was given in 1990. It was the first time they had ever given that award, and Aram was the original recipient. I don't think they knew that he still had about 35 good years left. The Mass Medical Society waited a little bit for their Lifetime Achievement Award and awarded it to him in 2007. He still had plenty of miles to go, but so he had 2 Lifetime Achievement Awards from those 2 very prestigious organizations. He also organized a wonderful team of investigators that worked with him here, and then many who moved on to become leading in the area of hypertension in other institutions. So Charlie Tift, I know, is here. Irene and Harry Gavris, I don't know if they're here or not, but they were longtime colleagues and co-collaborators with Aram and very good friends as well. So the people that he gathered around him, no surprise, were great people, and they left even greater. Let me turn now to just one of his publications, which I think tells us a lot about Aram's approach to science and to leadership. Starting in about 1980, the National Heart, Lung, Blood Institute thought that the nation should have a summary document about what we know about high blood pressure and what to treat it. And they continued to publish these things about every 3 or 4 years for the next 20 years. Aram was involved in the publication of every one except the very first one, and he was the chairman of the writing committee for the 4th version and the 7th version, which was published in 2003. And that's the one that I want to talk about today, because by the time 2003 came along, we knew a lot about high blood pressure. We knew a lot about the damage that it did. We knew a lot about the benefits that could be afforded to patients by appropriate treatment. And there were, by that time, 50 medications that were available to treat it. And so a summary of the state of affairs of high blood pressure in 2003, or rather 2001, when the writing actually began, was a daunting task. There were 86 authors involved in this work. Every one of them was an expert. There were 386 references appended at the end of the work, so it was quite an in-depth study. And in addition to that, it remains probably the best document about an overview of high blood pressure that exists. It's been downloaded from the internet over 1 million times. It's been cited by other scientific writers over 20,000 times. And so there's a lot for Aram to be proud of if he would have chosen to do it. But the thing that I think jumps out at me in this regard, and it's also apparent from his curriculum vitae, he was involved in 20 major committees and task force for the NIH, for the FDA, for the American Heart Association, and those are all listed in his curriculum vitae. That's not so unusual probably for a person of his seniority. What was unusual was he only listed the ones for which he had served as chairman. He had served as chairman on all of those. And I think, so the question that one would have to ask is, why? Why was he always listed as the chairman? And I think this is what I'd like to spend the last couple minutes on, which is his leadership ability. He had lots of features of successful leaders. He was of course, knowledgeable, and so he earned respect in the regard of the science and the medicine of it all. But in addition to that, he was a warm and likable person. There were no sharp edges on Aram. Everybody who knew him that I knew, thought he was wonderful, and of course I did too. But he also had a calm demeanor, which could take down the temperature in a room if there were people having intense debates or if there was an intense time pressure. Aram's involvement had a way of calming everybody down and allowing them to do the work in a more effective and congenial way. He was a great listener. It is said that God gave people 2 ears and 1 mouth and expected them to use it in that proportion. Aram did that. He would listen carefully to what everybody was saying, and at the end, if he chose to make some sort of a summary statement, you could tell that he heard all the points of view in the room. And he also, he loved laughter. He had a terrific sense of humor. He seemed to particularly enjoy watching me squirm in certain situations. And in addition to all that, he was humble. Those are all characteristics in some mix or other many leaders have. The thing that was different about Aram that I think glued all this together, at least from my point of view, was Aram had a firm belief in the innate goodness inside everybody. He thought that if somebody didn't do a good job, it was not some failure or poor work, it was just the plight of mankind. And the next time he was sure that that person would do it better. And he imparted that sense of confidence into those around him so that they really did do better. And in a meeting like that, even the 86 experts on the writing committee for the JNC7 blood pressure document were able to see that maybe they needed to be a little bit more open-minded about some of their approaches and maybe do some compromising. And I think Aram's leadership in that regard was, I think, the outstanding characteristics that I knew of him as a scientist and as an academician. I'm probably seconds over my limit, but I'm going to tell one quick story. This is a personal story that I'm going to make it fit into this. So in 2003, when Aram left the medical campus to become the ad interim president, he asked me to step in as the ad interim provost. That was one of his jobs on the medical campus. And around the time that he was leaving, I stopped by his office with 2 bottles of champagne. One of them was okay. And I said, Aram, I want you to enjoy this champagne to celebrate your new position as president of the university. The other bottle was good. And I said, Aram, this one we should drink when you come back. So we drank the okay one on the spot, and off he went. 10 years passed, and Mary, my wife, and I were going to meet Jasmine and Aram and go out to dinner down in Newport. And he said, stop by our place and we'll have a drink on the way. So you're already way ahead of where I was. We stopped by, and he showed us their beautiful place overlooking the harbor, and he comes out with a bottle of champagne. He said, do you remember this? And to tell the truth, I didn't. But it was the exact same bottle that I had given him in 2003, saved all that time, waiting for an opportunity to share it together. And I'd like to think that although it was just the 4 of us in that room, that the medical campus would have been more than happy to lift a glass to Aram for his return to the medical campus and to have a chance to be recognized and appreciated for all the wonderful things he did there. Thank you.
I'm Dr. Karen Antman. I'm the current dean of Boston University's Chobanian and Avedisian School of Medicine. And I first met Aram when he had taken over as BU president, when I began to negotiate to be the dean. When I became the dean, he told me that he would always be available, so we used to have lunch, and he would explain why the things were the way they were, give me the history, and he wasn't naive. He warned me about several people as well. He clearly understood leadership. He was smart, funny, practical, and as Tom said, noticeably warm. When he became the president of BU, many BU faculty told me afterwards, after he had done his first assembly, that as soon as he finished his address, they knew BU was going to be okay. Aram was so many things to so many people: a physician, a scientist, a scholar, a teacher, a mentor, and a friend. His accomplishments on the medical campus were many. As Tom Moore just described, Aram initially established his academic reputation in hypertension, and then he expanded it to cardiovascular research. He founded the Whitaker Cardiovascular Institute in 1973. He was instrumental in creating the BioSquare Research Park, a BU and BMC partnership to provide incubator space for biotech startups. He supported the school's application for the National Emerging Infectious Disease Laboratories. And despite his responsibilities in leadership, he maintained his commitment and dedication to his patients, faculty, and the students. I asked a few of his colleagues for their impressions on working with Aram. One was John McCann, who served as Aram's Associate Dean of Academic Affairs and then as Dean when Aram was called abruptly to the BU presidency. Dr. McCann noted that one of the more challenging issues during Aram's tenure was the merger between University Hospital and Boston City Hospital. You've certainly read about other mergers in the news and know how difficult those are. As with all mergers, the departments were duplicated at the two hospitals, and many leaders on both sides distrusted and even disliked their counterparts, and John McCann used stronger language than that, but I won't do that. Merging these hospitals, facilities, and staff, and managing the variety of stakeholders required planning, perseverance, patience, and not just over a couple of weeks, but over years, real leadership. He was honored with the Massachusetts Medical Society's Lifetime Achievement Award in 2008. Diana Lehman, who was Aram's executive assistant both as dean and then as president, reminded me of Aram's commitment to healthcare and education in Armenia. We not only had a steady stream of healthcare leadership and Fogarty scholarships from Yerevan, but he also arranged for an invitation for my husband and I to visit the medical school there and speak at a conference that he arranged. Today, we continue to work with our Armenian healthcare leadership in primary care, emergency medicine, and neurology programs. So it's very fitting that the medical school is now named for him and his childhood friend, Edward Avedisian. The naming really resonated with the faculty and staff who had worked with him. He was a very special person, genuine, honest, compassionate, and most of all, kind. And although I was a little bit bigger than, taller than Aram, I've always looked up to him and was honored to call him a friend.
Let me begin by saying it is an honor to speak this afternoon to friends and colleagues gathered to celebrate the life of Aram Chobanian, a wonderful man, a great scientist, great academic leader, and my friend. Bev and I came to know Aram and Jasmine as we joined the BU community in the summer of 2005. Aram was 76 years old, moving into what most people would think was the home stretch of a distinguished career as a physician, scientist, and academic leader, having served as the dean of the School of Medicine for 17 years. However, in the fall of 2003, he was called to take on one very critical role for Boston University. As the university convulsed because of misguided governance and a failed presidential search, Aram stepped into the office on the 8th floor of One Silver Way as interim president. I don't think he would have ever imagined himself there. And I can't even begin to picture the amount of persuasion that was needed to get him to take the assignment. However, he said yes, and because he cared deeply about the university, as I was going to learn over many conversations with him. It was a time of embarrassing levels of boardroom turmoil and faculty anxiety. And Aram brought what I learned was his marquee calmness, conviction, and humility to the task of leading the university through the uncertainty and unrest. He worked closely with the evolving board leadership, including Alan Leventhal and Bob Knox, to craft the changes in the university bylaws that were needed to establish good governance that set the foundations for what we have today. He had served with the grace and charm with which he did everything, wooing people to his side in tense meetings over critical decisions and charming the undergraduates by playing piano at the senior breakfast, accompanied by vocalists performing songs he wrote for the occasion. I pity you, Ken, that you didn't have to do this. I remember how intimidated I was in my first senior breakfast, learning how Aram had just done it the year before. I am no performer. The admiration of others for Aram's accomplishments were resolved throughout the institution. His service to the university went well beyond what anyone could imagine. Later, he was named the 9th president of the university for this extraordinary service. This leads me to one story that I want to share, as it epitomizes Aram's humanity and humility. It is when I was approached by Edward Abadizian and Pam, who wanted to name the medical school after Aram with their magnificent gift. Ed, an incredibly accomplished investor and musician, was a boyhood friend of Aram's in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, and wanted to honor Aram without any fanfare whatsoever. I made my way to Aram's home to share the news and to get Aram's concurrence with the idea. Of course, I failed. The meeting went badly. It wasn't tense. Humbly but definitively, Aram said he could not accept the honor and that Ed's name should be on the school. I rode back to Boston thinking about my quandary, trying to get agreement on the biggest gift in the history of the School of Medicine from two humble gentlemen, both so stubborn, neither budging on the notion that the other one would have their name on it. We all know the grand compromise that resulted, actually brokered between Aram and Ed. The best possible outcome that led to the naming of the Chobanian and Abadizian School of Medicine. I'm going to take a deep breath. I said it correctly. Several times I have made the Freudian slip of calling it the School of Music. I guess buried in my mind, I see them both as performer and composer. Actually, my fondest memory that's in my head of Aram was on the stage with Ed in September 2022, when we announced the gift and the naming of the school. Watching the two of them interact like two old friends from Pawtucket. Aram's roots were from the same sturdy Armenian stock as Ed's, and it showed through to everyone.
Good afternoon. My name is Justin Casangino. I'm a lecturer in the College of Fine Arts. I'm here today because I had the honor of calling Aram my student. It was around, I was going back through some emails to look for some music for today, and I think it was around May 23rd of 2011. The then director of the School of Music, Richard Cornell, sent me an email that just had the heading, "A Small Gig." Well, that small gig ended up turning into really one of the most meaningful relationships of my adult life. That small gig was giving composition lessons to Aram. He came to me, we met, and he said he was looking for someone to make arrangements of the melodies he wrote. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And he was a little shocked. I said, but I'll teach you to do it yourself. And I think that's really where our wonderful relationship started, because Aram loved to learn. He would want you to know he was a very good student. He asked me all the time, and he said, am I improving? Am I getting better? I said, yes, Aram, you're getting better. He really, really wanted to know. It's true. So we worked on all types of things, instrumental music. He went and saw Hamilton, and he came back, and he wanted to write some rap, so we worked on that. But absolutely, Aram's true love was writing song, and that included writing operas. He wrote several operas, operettas perhaps. This is his first one. It's an adaptation of Tom Jones. It feels successful, right? It's and he wrote an opera on Isabella Stewart Gardner, Enrico Caruso, Harry Truman, and all of these operas we ended up recording over at the CFA with grad students. And he took great pleasure in that. He loved to support those students in that way. He had a wonderful time coming into the studio and listening to those and working with those students, and it was a great honor to do that. I will say that in Aram, yes, I found a student, but the amazing thing about Aram is what I really found was a mentor and someone that I could look up to. And I'm sure many of you have had a similar experience. Part of it was that love for learning. This was someone who was now, when he first came in his 80s, we worked with each other for over 12 years, and he just continued to want to learn. And if I am blessed to be anywhere near Aram's age, may I continue to have that passion. I always thought it was wonderful. He just wanted to do something new. It was always inspiring to also see research come in. I know I'm here to talk about his music, but research is an art, and Aram brought that art to his music as well. These operas, he would research them all. He'd have the big 3-ring binders, the big white binders with the highlighted notes, and it was just kind of watching that was a wonderful thing. But also, it was great for me to see someone who is this high level in academia, and I've always been interested in the inner workings, and he would let me pick his brain about it. He'd give me some good gossip, which was always nice. But he was also, through all of that, just a very, very normal guy. I think perhaps our long New England roots connected on that. Often after lessons, we would just sit in the kitchen and talk. We would talk about the Sox. We would talk about the Pats. Went through good times and bad times on those. We would talk politics. Went through good times and bad times on those. And it was just always a pleasure to sit and talk with him. And part of that also, someone that I could look up to in this academic business we're in, is just someone who absolutely adored and loved his family through all the work that he did. I had the pleasure to just hear him constantly talk about his children, his grandchildren, how much he loved you all, and of course, Jasmine. The absolute love of his life. And a lot of his songs that he wrote were very much dedicated to Jasmine, whether directly or not quite directly. And he would tell me often, towards the end of things, writing the songs, working on composition, it really gave him some purpose and gave him something new to do and gave him something that would help fill that space a little bit. So we thought, as a way to honor that, the family asked that we do a song today. So the song that we're going to do is called A Very Special Person. It's actually one of the songs that was sung at that breakfast. And we thought it would be a wonderful song to share with you because it does a couple of things. First of all, it certainly shows Aram's love of song. He wrote it, and it's a beautiful song. It is very much about Jasmine. It is all about Jasmine. So I know Aram would like taking this moment to honor Jasmine. And it's also in there is his love of BU as well. It talks about BU and all the things that they did together for the university because he truly loved this place. I'm going to be joined, I'm sorry it's not in the program, I'm going to be joined with one of our Masters of Music who's graduating just this weekend, Gretchen Struckmeyer, who's going to come up and join me on the piece.
With such speed I'm proudly representing here the Fund for Armenian Relief. So I will delve into what this remarkable person, Dr. Aram Chobanian, symbolizes for the Armenian world. And it would be impossible to describe everything that he has done for Armenia within the limited time allotted to me. Whatever I'm going to share with you is just a fraction of what he has done. So when Armenians were in dire need after the 1988 earthquake, Dr. Chobanian embarked on a mission of mercy to our homeland in coordinating the relief efforts to the victims and their families. But his work didn't stop when the immediate crisis subsided. It only took a shape that was defined by him. For more than 24 years, he was one of the guiding lights in reshaping the healthcare system of the Republic of Armenia following its independence after the Soviet Union. Fund for Armenian Relief, where I work, was blessed by having two giants on our board, Dr. Aram Chobanian and Dr. Edgar Husepian from Columbia University. Thanks to their foresight and tireless efforts, their compassionate involvement in Armenian life, lasting improvements were made in the way people are cared in Armenia. Their legacy lies in the creation of foundations of sustainable healthcare in Armenia through supporting the continued professional growth of Armenian doctors. They expanded opportunities for Armenian healthcare professionals by providing access to resources not only at the BU Medical School, not only at the Columbia Medical School, but to many other schools and hospitals in the United States. Thanks to this magnanimous program, initiated since Armenia became independent, a new generation of Armenian physicians, more than 100 of them, benefited from the program established by these two giants. When returned back to Armenia after rigorous trainings in the US, these doctors became the agents of change, transforming the healthcare system inherited by the Soviet Union. There are 2.3 million people in Armenia. More than half of them live in rural areas. They rely with their healthcare problems on about 5,000 doctors in the remote towns and villages of Armenia. These doctors are often the last hope for many, deciding between life and death. Dr. Chobanian's legacy transcends institutions where these doctors work. His impact is evident in the improved healthcare and the higher quality of life for hundreds of thousands of underserved Armenians in Armenia, for hundreds of thousands of people. Moreover, back in 1999, Aram Chobanian, together with other luminaries of the Armenian Americans in the United States, people like doctors Vartan Gregorian, Edgar Husepian, Gregory Adamian, Yervan Terzian, and others, they pioneered the establishment of the Armenian National Science and Education Fund, ANSEF, as we call it. As a passionate scientist himself, Aram understood the critical importance of a strong research environment for a nation to survive and thrive. He recognized that a conducive environment for intellectuals to flourish was essential. So by helping to stem the brain drain of intellectuals, ANSEF continues to maintain Armenia as a rich source of cutting-edge research and development. And Dr. Aram Chobanian remained dedicated to the mission of ANSEF to the very last day. He was serving as a member of the Board of Trustees of ANSEF. To honor his legacy, the Fund for Armenian Relief is sponsoring a major international symposium this year dedicated to Dr. Aram Chobanian. And also, we have established a special ANSEF grant named after Aram Chobanian. That grant will be presented to the best research work in the field of biomedicine in Armenia. It brings me a great joy to tell you that Fund for Armenian Relief was graced with another exceptional member on our board of directors. Following Dr. Aram Chobanian's recommendation, Dr. Richard Babayan has taken his place as FAR director and trustee. I'm certain Dr. Babayan doesn't need an introduction to the Boston University community. Under his leadership, our organization continues to make significant contributions to the enhancement of the Armenian healthcare. There's much to talk about the legacy of Aram Chobanian for the Armenian world. Dr. Chobanian's passing was deeply mourned in Armenia because he was revered there as a towering figure in the global Armenian community. His life exemplified compassion, dedication, and unwavering commitment to improvement healthcare for all. Today, as we reflect on his life, we do so both with sorrow and gratitude, recognizing him as a shining example of the Armenian heritage at its best.
When Lisa, Karen, and Aram reached out to me to speak today at Aram Chobanian's celebration of life service, my first reaction was one of terror, then of truly feeling honored, and as I reflected a bit more, I wondered why I was being asked to speak, and again became quite anxious. So from the roller coaster of emotions, a few reflections. Aram was my dean at the medical school, my president at BU, the distinguished scientist you heard from Tom, who authored many seminal articles and led the hypertension guidelines that I followed closely. But he was also my musical inspiration when he brought in the CDs of his compositions that he started to work on and completed into his 80s and 90s. He provided me access to online operas at the Met for my holiday gift. And just this past Monday, I got a reminder from the Met that there's an encore screening of Madame Butterfly at local cinemas tonight as we gather here. Aram signed my promotion letter when I became a professor, was a trusted confidant when I was thinking about next steps in my career, and took on the role of Chief Medical Officer at Boston Medical Center. And yes, he was a patient of mine over many years, but more than anything else, Aram was my friend. Wasn't that easy to have Aram as a patient? He'd come in for his scheduled visits and he'd casually say, well, I halved my ACE inhibitor over the last few weeks because I felt postural and didn't think I should keep the same dose. And I nodded approvingly, but really knowing he knew much better than I what to do. Then he would tell me, I increased my diuretic dose because I have these symptoms and I'm sure it's from my right heart. Okay, I nodded. I knew he was right and we moved on. Then at some point he said, I don't need this device anymore. It hasn't gone off since they implanted it. Let's take it out. And so we did. But he was never, ever being pushy or inappropriate. He was just an incredibly knowledgeable, kind, and smart patient, as he was in every other aspect of his life. But the time when I really saw Aram's character come through was when he was coming to the end of his life, and he knew it. He had absolutely no regrets, felt truly fulfilled with all that he had experienced and enjoyed. And even when he knew deep down that his time on this earth was coming to an end, he gave the ultimate consideration to his children to make sure they were comfortable with and agreed with his end-of-life decisions. I was just reflecting on this with my wife as we drove in, on those many conversations we had, just talking through these challenges. It was an amazing experience for me as I watched the love and bonding that went into how they cared for each other and moved forward with respect as they made decisions how best to navigate the last few days with their father and respect his wishes. I am grateful to have had the opportunity to share my life, some of my life, with a true giant of a man. Aram, you are the epitome of the term mensch. I'm sure you're looking down saying, oh, stop that, enough. We miss you very much, friend. Rest well.
Hi, I'm Lisa Chobanian, and Dr. Davidoff, I had it all together until you came up. Thanks a lot. This has really been incredibly heartwarming. Thank you, everyone, so much. To start off the family part of the program, I thought I would take this opportunity to not only share some of my memories, but also take you back to the beginning to see what shaped who my father was. And it really starts with his family. His father and uncle were just 10 and 12 years old when they had to leave school in Armenia because their father was killed during the genocide. They worked as laborers at a very young age so that they could support their mother and their brother, who had recently been inflicted with polio. Given everything that was going on in Armenia at the time, their mother was concerned about their safety and urged them to leave. They fled to Constantinople first, saving enough to support their mother and brother back home, and eventually saved enough money to buy boat tickets to the United States. They arrived at Ellis Island, no money, no knowledge of English, and eventually landed in Rhode Island, where there was a community of Armenian immigrants who helped them find jobs. And it was really in that Armenian community that my parents met. They eloped at a young age to Niagara Falls. My father's oldest brother, Korkin, was born first, then his brother, Karen, and almost a decade later came my father. Growing up in the working-class Armenian community in Pawtucket was really a happy time and kind of like having extended family around. And I really think Ed Avedisian described it best at the naming ceremony when he said they didn't have money, but they had everything that money can't buy. When he was young, my father always wanted to hang with his brothers and their friends, but because of their age difference, it was hard for him to break into their circle. But he was a diehard Red Sox fan, was good with numbers, and he had developed this unique talent. He knew the batting averages of not just all of the Red Sox, but most all major league players. His brothers finally let him into the group, and my father became the neighborhood source of all the information and stats on baseball players. As his brothers grew and left the house, my father poured himself into his studies. His parents were really strict about education, and his uncle in particular was an intellectual mentor to him. Following high school, my father went off to Brown University. And so the Jasmine chapter begins, as it was really there that my parents met. Ironically, they lived only a few blocks apart in Pawtucket, but they never really had any personal interactions prior to that. They both commuted to Brown. They were waiting for the same bus one day when, following a nice chat, they exchanged phone numbers. He then asked her out to a campus dance that was held before Thanksgiving during a football game, and apparently they had a great time with her doing most of the talking. No surprise, right? The story got a little murky after that, but as my mother would tell it, he waited too long for him to call her. So when he saw her on a bus a couple of weeks later, sensing something was wrong and she was off, he called the very next day. Fortunately, it all worked out, and he never dated another woman again. They got married after he graduated medical school. While they were pretty different, they really were the perfect match, and these differences were evident from their early years. We loved as kids when they would break out their high school yearbooks. Both made the class superlatives in their year, and we would look at those lists. And my father was awarded most reserved, most studious, and most scholarly. And my mother, the cheerleader, was most popular and best actress. So you get the idea. So on to our childhood. Karen was born first, then me, and 3 years later, Aram Jr. And growing up, we were all very close, and my father, though he worked hard, was always there for us, teaching us how to swim or ride a bike. He was also always the doctor. No matter how hard we tried, we could never get away with trying to stay home from school, as he could always tell if we were really sick or not. And our kitchen table became a bit of an ambulatory center at times, whether neighbors would show up asking if their child's legs might be broken or just sprained, or the time the kitchen table became an operating room after our cat got in a fight with a big tomcat. He actually brought home a suture kit and sewed the cat's wounds up himself. Looking back, while that's endearing, it's kind of crazy. And when Karen and I were teenagers and wanted our ears pierced, there were no piercing stalls at the mall back then. Nope, it was at our kitchen table. And this time my father brought home sterile needles, numbing our earlobes with ice cubes, performed the cosmetic surgery. And I have to say he did a pretty good job. As we grew up, he taught us how to drive, moved us into our dorms, and for me, it was right down the street here at West Campus. He also later moved me to New York as I pursued graduate school and was always supportive of whatever choice we made and let us find our own paths. Although there was one choice that I made that he never approved of, and that was my support of the New York Yankees. Travel was always a big part of our lives as well. As my father's research and career progressed, he had the opportunity to travel, first giving talks around the country, then around the globe. And boy, did my mother love traveling with him. They would go often, adding on a day or two wherever they were, traveling around, getting to meet different people, eating the different foods, and spending time with other colleagues and their wives. And we all got to share in that joy too and accompany them either together or separately. And I have just such amazing memories and great stories from going with them to Australia, Asia, Armenia, and Europe. But despite all the exotic travel, the best memories were really closer to home. Our trips with cousins, the parties that they hosted, family gatherings, holidays. Another special time was in summers and at their place in Newport, Rhode Island. And as he would say, Newport was their Camelot. He and my mother really did share some wonderful times there, and it became a gathering place for a lot of us, as you heard earlier, his grandchildren and their close friends. And Newport became a very special place for me, too, and my father was so thrilled when I bought my own little place in Camelot. After my mom passed, he accused us of being helicopter children, and we would be in touch with him daily. While he may have felt that we were hovering, it was also just because it was great talking to him and being around him. He was funny. He could be silly. He was interesting. He gave great advice, which in hindsight I probably should have taken more of. He knew the best shows to binge watch, and he was so well-read, reading 3 newspapers a day. I would love when I would come to visit and stay with him, there'd always be articles that he'd cut out of the newspaper, things that he thought I would like, and leaving them for me on my bed to read. And while there were 3 of us children, in a way there was really almost a 4th adopted child that was always a part of our lives, and that was BU. Despite his Ivy League education, he was a BU man through and through. He was someone who genuinely loved his job, his time at the lab, as dean of the med school, as president, and later as an ambassador of sorts of the university. And as with us, he was also really committed to making BU the best it could be. He loved going to the various events, whether it was a beanpot game, graduations, fundraisers, or other functions. We loved going with him, too. And I'm sure he and my mother are especially thrilled that we are today gathering together here at Marsh Chapel to remember him. And we thank the university for all they have done for him and for today especially. In closing, as you can imagine, for our family, the loss is especially great. The man you heard about, who so many loved and respected, we got to call Dad. We won the parent lottery, and we were so lucky to have both of them. We're so grateful that he lived a long, well-lived, purposeful life, and with a sharp mind and independence until the end. We love and we miss you, Dads.
Hi, I'm Aram Jr. So every morning at 6 a.m., my dad would wake me and he would have breakfast with my mother, Jasmine. At 6:30 a.m., he directed me to wait for him in the driveway, and he would be dressed in his London fog coat with his attaché case for work in one hand, and in the other hand, he had a football. And for 15 minutes every day before work, he would pass that football 10, 20, even 30 yards to me. This happened every day, even in the snow. This ritual, over the years, brought us very close. And created a strong bond, a strong friendship, and a strong sense of camaraderie and trust between us like teammates. As years went on, he went to all my football practices and games, always arriving before the kickoff, never missing one, and traveled out of state just to be there. Whether it was during his time at his laboratory seeing patients, chairing conferences, or grant writing, he always put being at the games first. Then one day, something very interesting happened at one of our football practices. To my absolute amazement, I noticed Dr. Chobanian started to park his Chevrolet Impala at the very corner of the football practice field. He exited his car and was wearing a tennis outfit with sneakers. As I looked over to my dad in his tennis outfit, I was thinking to myself, what in the world is he doing? Then lo and behold, I see him running up and down the sidelines, back and forth, over and over, following the running drills on the practice field step by step that we were doing. With the utmost respect for my dad, I did not question his behavior. This remarkably and mysteriously continued for 6 weeks at several of the practices. He finally spoke up and mentioned his behavior and said out of the blue, "I want you to train me this summer." Again, not asking why, with the utmost respect for him. So that summer, in the 1970s, my dad would join us in a small independent training group with a few other players. I remember he was so enthusiastic about the training that one evening he returned late from work after dark and did not want to miss a practice, so he actually drove his Impala on the football field and kept the car lights on so we could all continue to train together. Finally, at the end of the summer, he asked me if he was in shape, and I said, "Absolutely you are." The mystery continues. He then proceeded to put both of his hands on my shoulders and said, "I have something to tell you." My eyes widened, and I was eager to hear what all of this is about. My dad spoke to me. "You know, I have a colleague at the Houston Space Center in Texas that is measuring blood pressures for future space station Skylabs." I replied, "Yes, of course." He paused and said, "I was asked to work with the Houston Space Center to monitor the astronauts' blood pressure." I responded, "Wow, how long will you be in Texas?" His response was, "I'm not going to Texas to take the blood pressure." I responded with a question, "What, in a training aircraft at 30,000 feet?" He said, "No, not at 30,000 feet, but actually 270 miles in outer space." I laughed and laughed and laughed. He said, "Don't laugh. Son, get in the car. We're going to Houston. I'm going to be an astronaut." He explained further. My colleagues at the Houston Space Center were asked to locate a physician that they were familiar with, that had expertise in hypertension, that could monitor blood pressure over a long period of time with the cosmonauts, and they want me to live on the current orbiting space station with the astronauts in outer space 270 miles above the Earth. We hugged and we were laughing with joy, and I said, "Dad, this is just great." So that night, my father told the girls, Jasmine, Karen, and Lisa, my dad said, "We need to take a family vote to see if we are all on board." And unfortunately, after further pondering, the girls outvoted the men 3-2, and the rest is history. And luckily, the vote allowed my father to cherish and explore BU, and to cherish dearly all of you. Thank you.
So everyone here today has had the opportunity to know Aram Chobanian in many different roles, but my brother Mark and I have had the unique opportunity to know him as our grandfather, and in turn had the privilege to be absolutely spoiled by him and my grandmother. We grew up a short walk up the hill from their house, spending countless hours eating, sharing, and laughing. Our grandparents worked as a double act, with our grandmother as the comic and my grandfather as the straight man. When they won a prized Celtics championship ball at an auction, they were distraught to find that it had been signed by the entire championship team except for their favorite player, Larry Bird. Years later, when Larry Bird received an honorary degree at BU, our grandfather immediately, unpromptedly, turned to his wife and told her she was not to bring that ball to graduation. She reluctantly agreed, and then, obviously to anyone who knew her, brought the ball anyway. I tell this story not to describe my grandfather as a killjoy, but because the truth is that our grandfather loved to be her accomplice. He loved the plausible deniability of telling her not to bring it, but more than that, he loved being part of a duo that would create such a compelling story to tell. Over the past 5 or 6 years, as I've gone through my own medical training, my Grampy and my conversation topics have shifted. Throughout the first 2 years of medical school, I would come home for dinner to tell him excited about all of the things I was learning in school. At first, I tried to impress him with all of the new innovations in medicine that I would learn about, only to quickly realize that even in his 90s, having not practiced clinical medicine in many years, he was still extremely up to date and had already read about everything in the New England Journal of Medicine. So instead, he told me stories of his time early in medical training, what the Wild West of medicine looked like before the concept of informed consent really solidified itself, and before the advent of many medications that I take for granted. He told stories that sounded straight out of episodes of House, including his first published case study, which came from a patient that he, as a medical student, watched go into cardiac arrest for just long enough so they could draw labs prior to administering a hopefully life-saving medication, so they could prove a definitive diagnosis. We also bonded over the ways that medicine hasn't changed, how he remembers counseling families of babies with bronchiolitis to use the steam from showers to help them clear their lungs, advice that I, as a pediatric resident, give on a daily basis. In 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic began in the middle of my medical school training, he sat me down at the dinner table and told me a story. When he graduated medical school in 1955, it was the height of the polio epidemic in Boston. He spent his intern year on nonstop shifts in rooms full of iron lungs, doing more lumbar punctures than I could ever imagine. He was forced to learn rapidly in an environment surrounded by tragedy. Ultimately, though, he was encouraged by the good he saw in the people around him. He shared stories with me of a patient's wife who fed drops of turtle soup to a patient in an iron lung with an eyedropper because it was his favorite food. He told me about a time that he snuck whiskey into the hospital for one of his patient's last wishes, and about how my grandmother, his brand new bride at the time, would bring him dinners while he was on call so they could still eat together. He told me, my early medical training was defined by polio, and yours likely will be by COVID, and it will change you and it will change medicine, but you'll come out the other side having learned more than you could really understand. Years ago, at my grandparents' 50th anniversary dinner, I, at the age of 10 years old, felt compelled to give an impromptu speech. So, to quote my 10-year-old self, "Grampy, you gave me so many things. You gave me the gift of multitasking because you made a great family and you have a great business, and you're just plain awesome." I was so fortunate to have my grandfather hood me at my medical school graduation, a moment that was truly special for both him and me. I have learned so much from him over the years about medicine, about leadership, about family, and I will cherish every single lesson and every moment we had together. Thank you.
I'm Karen, Dr. Chobanian's oldest daughter. How lucky was I to have the man everyone spoke so effusively about today as my father. In addition to his work and philanthropic activities, he was a lover of travel and the arts, played tennis, was a Boston sports enthusiast, but most importantly, a loving family man. Everything that you experienced with dads at Boston University, he brought to his family, and so much more. We experienced his commitment to family by example from when we were very young. After a long day at work, dads would stop by his mother's house around the corner from us to check on her every evening before coming home for dinner. She would have his favorite zhazhik, cottage cheese with fresh herbs, ready with carrots and celery. He'd call my mother on the phone to let her know he'd be home soon, and we'd scramble so dinner would be ready for him. No matter what time it was, we'd always have dinner together. At least 4 to 5 days a week, it would be his beloved chicken and pilav. As children, we had his favorite meal so much that we were thrilled when served anything else. After dinner, we'd play games at the table and eat pumpkin seeds. In Armenian, they're called good. Many times, dads would pull out the roulette wheel and we'd play with pennies. It was always a fun way to spend time together. I think it also had the unintended effect of enhancing my enjoyment of casinos and trips to Las Vegas. Dads adored my children as they did him. Like us, they were taken by my parents on fascinating trips abroad and became familiar with other cultures and their arts. Dads never missed a football game or chorus performance of Mark's or one of Vanessa's many concerts, plays, or musicals. As you've already heard, his relationship with Mark and Vanessa grew and deepened as they grew older. He was so proud of their accomplishments and the amazing young adults that they've become. Some of my fondest memories of dads revolved around sports. While he loved them all, the Celtics and Red Sox, and of course the BU Terriers, were closest to his heart. As kids, he would take us to the Red Sox games and we'd sit in the bleachers. We'd hear each time we went how he and my mother lived close to the ballpark at their first apartment on the Fenway. When we were older and out of the house, he and my mother would watch every Celtics game together from start to finish. I remember numerous times I would stop by their home in Natick to find them cheering, actually yelling at the TV for the Celtics to make a shot or guard against an opponent. Dad's was resigned after so many years of Red Sox heartbreak to never seeing them win a World Series championship. In 2004, though, when living in Sloan House as president of BU, he was able to take Mark to a World Series game and was ecstatic with the Red Sox win. He and my mother attended the victory parade near BU with me and the kids, excitedly waiting to cheer on Big Papi and the rest of the Sox. As president, Dad supported many of the BU sports teams and attended many of their games. And after my mother passed away, he would call me after a Patriots or Celtics playoff or BU Beanpot win to share his excitement. When the phone rang, I always knew it was him, but there'd be no calls if they lost. Dad's love for my mother was as endless as hers was for him. I know he felt so fortunate to have her in his life for their 59 years of marriage. In addition to the beautiful Jasmine song that you heard and which he composed for her, she loved all of his works and kept urging him to continue as he always encouraged her to do with her painting. When my mom passed away, a light went out in my father. It was devastating to him. Spending his days composing music was a lifeline that kept him going each day after my mother's death. He also had close friends who regularly called and met with him, and Lisa, Aram, and I visited or called every day. Since we lived around the corner, we routinely brought him meals, but Dad's was most happy when he could cook for us. My mother would teasingly call him a new bride when he cooked because there would always be something about the dish that wasn't quite right. But over time, he became an excellent chef in his own right. He loved having us over for dinner and cooking for us as often as possible. I was Dad's +1 many times at BU or Armenian events. He would look forward to the outings and tell me in advance about the many friends and/or colleagues I would meet. I was honored to get to know so many of them and you. Pamela and Ed Avadesian were two in particular. Ed was similar to my father in so many ways, and Pamela, warm, intelligent, and lovely. They and their family have become family to us. Dad's was my confidant and advisor, my healthcare interpreter, my cheerleader, and my rock. I miss him every day, but I also now know how fortunate I was to have such a wonderful example of a life well lived. President Freeman, Dr. Hill, President Brown, trustees, family, and friends, thank you for helping us honor our extraordinary father today. Thank you, Dr. Hill, for officiating at this event. Dads would have been touched by your kind words. Know that he considered you a good friend. President Freeman, thank you for hosting this special event. My father was so pleased when he heard that you were taking over the same role that he had over 20 years ago. Dr. Moore, thank you for highlighting my father's many scientific contributions. You two were a great colleague and friend. He loved your visits, and whenever he received fresh vegetables from you, he would always boast to us about your harvest. Also, just a little story when you told about the American Heart Association giving my father, I think it was that, giving him a Lifetime Achievement Award in 1990. It turned out that it was the same day that my son Mark was born. So when it was given and he accepted the award, he told them that it was the second best thing that happened to him today. And people couldn't understand why. And then he said, because my first grandson was just born. So that reminded me. Dr. Antman, thank you. My father knew that his beloved BU Medical School was in great hands with you. He appreciated your collaboration, friendship, and all the time you spent together. President Brown, thank you for speaking today. My father felt that you accomplished so much during your time as president of Boston University. He appreciated your friendship that developed between the two of you. He and my mother always looked forward to seeing you in Beverly. I think the only time Dad's wasn't happy seeing you was when you asked him to accept the naming of the medical school after him. That is true. It was Justin, what can I say? Thank you for being my father's musical teacher, musical mentor, and friend. You helped make his music come to life with the recordings and CDs that were produced with the BU student singers. We appreciate all of your help with the musical portion of this service. And a special thank you to Gretchen. That was such a beautiful performance of my father's song. It was just really beautiful. Garnig, you and FAR meant so much to my father. Having an organization that was able to make a difference in helping Armenians was so important to him. He felt very close to you, trusted you, and also considered you a good friend. Dr. David, as his colleague, physician, and friend, my father admired you and your commitment to the underserved populations. He felt you were such a good friend, and your words about him today were so moving. A special thank you to Michael Ciolante, Christine Wynn, and their team at Boston University for organizing the day, and to Diana Lehman for her many years of service to our father. My hope is that my father and mother are together now and also here with us today. I know my father would be moved by the words spoken about him, and my mother would say, "This has been magnificent." Thank you all.
Before we close with a psalm and a prayer, and before we go next door to continue the conversation with family and friends, won't you join me in expressing personally and with some applause all that our speakers and others have brought to us today. In the psalm, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And we pray. Gracious and loving God, who has brought condolence to our grief, keenness to our remembrance, courage to our acceptance, spirit to our affirmation. Thou who hast loved us into love and freed us into freedom. Grant us thy peace. Grant us thy peace. Grant us thy peace. Amen. The hymn is 711.